Our next case study is from Sydney's Central City, from Parramatta. We're going to be hearing from Katie Wearne, Social Outcomes, City of Parramatta, and Melissa Mason from the Partnerships team at the Centre for Population Health from the Western Sydney Local Health District.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Mason. I'm from the Partnerships team in Population Health at Western Sydney Local Health District, and this is Katie Wearne from the Social Outcomes team at City of Parramatta Council. So today we're taking you through a social return on investment evaluation we did on the parks and sports grounds in City of Parramatta. Let's see if we can. So how do our councils ensure quality green open space is provided in our CBD and neighbourhoods that are undergoing rapid transformational change? I'm sure this is a question of interest to many of you here, and City of Parramatta Council is no exception. Council's population is expected to grow to 400,000 by 2036. Population growth, high density development and urban renewal are changing the area from a suburban centre to Sydney's Central City, the centre of services, infrastructure and employment for Western Sydney. This growth is putting pressure on our shared resources, and our parks and sports grounds are struggling to keep up with the demand. As we all know, it's well understood that quality green open space creates an environment which promotes physical, mental and social health for all, including increased physical activity, reduced exposure to noise and heat, stress relief and relaxation, improve social capital and cohesion within communities. City of Parramatta provides around 350 parks and sports grounds for residents, visitors and workers to enjoy. And by 2036, 70% of our population will be living in high density. And this changes the way people live and how they use open spaces, either as a backyard, meeting place or play space. So to better understand and demonstrate the value that our parks and sports grounds have for our community, together with Council we commissioned a social return on investment evaluation. And the purpose of this evaluation was to understand, quantify and assess the social and economic value created by Council's parks and sports grounds. We completed this work in consultation with our consultants, Think Impact, and to our knowledge, this is the first time an SROI of its kind has been completed in Australia.
Okay, so what is an SROI evaluation? An SROI is an evaluation tool that we can help us to understand, measure, and quantify the social, economic, and environmental value that is created by an activity, program, or organisation. So in this case, we use the SROI tool to measure the social and economic value that is generated directly as a result of parks and sports grounds provided and maintained by Council. So put simply, an SROI is a calculation that compares the investment required to deliver an activity and the value that the activity delivers for stakeholders. An SROI is typically known as using a financial lens to capture social value, and you might have heard of it before as a ratio. So for example, if a ratio is 1:3, that demonstrates that for every dollar you put into an activity, you get $3 worth of social value in return. So the ratio is considered shorthand for expressing the value that's created, but it's just that. It's just a shorthand measurement. We really want to stress that it's a representation, and we want to largely place our emphasis on the value that's created by the activity in qualitative terms. So that's where this presentation will focus. Okay, so an SROI evaluation is based on 7 core principles which underpin how an SROI should be undertaken. And these principles work together to ensure that our analysis only takes credit for the value that is created as a direct result of Council's open spaces. So we don't want to be taking credit for any value that's created by others. One of the key principles of the SROI is listed up there, and that's do not overclaim. So this means that in SROI evaluations, a conservative approach is taken for decision making, and particularly for any data and assumptions that are used in the SROI calculation. So it's therefore likely that some of the values you'll see in today's presentation actually understate the value that's created by our parks and sports grounds. So because of the sheer number of open spaces in our LGA, you heard 350 before, we had to make a decision about, do we actually need to assess all of these parks and sports grounds. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that it wasn't going to be possible. So we decided to hone in, and we chose to assess only our local and district parks and sports grounds. That came down to around 126, so still a lot. We realised that we couldn't go out and conduct an SROI evaluation at 126 parks and sports grounds, so we made the decision to conduct a mini SROI at 5 sites. And we selected these sites because they were thought to be largely representative of our open space network overall. They possessed many of the qualities and characteristics that are prominent in our sports grounds and parks. And these included things such as we chose ones that were located near high density development, and others that weren't, so in our low density residential communities. And we chose others that had a mix of facilities provided there, so circuit loops, some with bathrooms, others without. So it was overall a pretty good representation of our network. So the 5 sites, we then conducted mini SROI evaluations at each of these. And then we scaled up the value that we got out of each of those sites and rolled them across our open space network of local and district parks and sports grounds to get an SROI value that was representative of our entire network. There are 5 stages of conducting an SROI evaluation. There are 5 stages because an SROI is really about creating a narrative of change. It's about telling a story. It's about telling a story of change, about how change is created for stakeholders and the impact that this change has on these stakeholders, and why they choose to use these facilities. Arguably, the most important stage of an SROI is stakeholder engagement. And this is because we really want to validate the assumptions that we have about what value the stakeholders are getting out of using our parks and sports grounds. We conducted desktop research and worked closely with a working group to identify who these stakeholders were, come up with what their motivations might be for using these facilities, and then we conducted the intensive stakeholder engagement to validate these assumptions. And that's because we don't want to be assuming any value that people are experiencing, and we need to consult to accurately capture feedback and perspectives. So as part of this engagement, we conducted 12 in-depth interviews with representatives of clubs who use our open spaces, local schools who use our sports grounds, and local businesses. Community members were also engaged, and we talked to about 824 community members. 470 of those were conducted online through our City Your Say panel, and the other ones were conducted by our working group going down and actually standing on the sports fields and parks and chatting to people, which was incredibly valuable. So in our engagement, we really tried to focus on what the difference was that was created through our parks and sports grounds. And the way we did this was through asking questions like, what would you do if the park didn't exist? So you can imagine a bunch of us going down to a local sports ground on the weekend saying we're from council and health, talking about our sports grounds, the types of reactions we got. When we asked people, what would you do if the park or sports ground didn't exist? The responses were very emotionally charged. Someone told me they would die. Jokes aside though, it did reveal the great emphasis of the value that people do experience at these sites. So once we got all that feedback together and consulting with 824 people plus, you can imagine how much data we had. We then had to sort the data, which was then used to reveal a range of outcomes that people experience as a result of visiting these spaces. And these outcomes were then supported and validated by evidence. So overall, we found that visitors to our open spaces experienced 9 outcomes that we realised as part of our SROI model. These outcomes ranged from improved personal development through to improved emotional and cognitive development, improved emotional well-being, and surprisingly for me, the most stated value experience at our parks and sports grounds is enhanced social connections, community pride, and belonging. If you had asked me before conducting this piece of research, hands down, I would have told you improved physical and mental health. So once this finding came out, we found that 38% of people, 38% of the value experienced was social connections, community pride, and belonging. We did a bit of research, and it's very widely documented in the literature through other people's findings. Our parks and sports grounds are really core tenants for our community. So a further 10 outcomes were included as part of the study, but we didn't see them through to the model. And this was for a range of reasons, but mostly because we didn't have enough evidence to support them as an outcome, or the stakeholder engagement didn't reveal it as being something that is a significant outcome. So it's not to say they're not important or they don't, that value isn't experienced at the sites. It's just to say for the purposes of our evaluation, it wasn't something that we really saw too much. And an example of this was an assumption we made was our local businesses would like being located next to an open space because their employees could use the open space in their lunch breaks, and that would be an attractive reason. As much as that is a value, we didn't really hear it very much from our businesses, so we didn't in this case include it in our model. So this is where it gets crazy. The SROI is a very complex tool, and I don't pretend to be an expert on it. So if you do have any questions, please contact us later and we'll do our best to answer them with the help of our consultants. But you're not meant to read this, don't worry. It's just to show you that the complexity of the SROI tool is very real. It's a bit like that noodle soup we were talking about before. But the SROI is really about only taking credit for the value that's experienced by the stakeholders at our sites, as we said before. So the way we do this is through identifying financial proxies. Financial proxies is a process of placing a monetary value on the changes experienced by individual stakeholders. So we do this by identifying where a stakeholder may experience a similar value elsewhere. So for example, one of the outcomes experienced by parks users was improved physical health. The financial proxy that was determined to best represent improved physical health, represent the equivalent or similar value elsewhere, was the cost of a local gym membership. And we actually use the cost of a local gym membership in Parramatta for this purpose. So we then consider the proportionate value and benefit of these outcomes that a stakeholder might experience in correlation with how often they visit a park or sports ground. So for example, if someone visits a park or sports ground really regularly, we're going to assign 60% of that gym membership value per year to that stakeholder group. Whereas our really infrequent visitors, we might only assign 20% of that value of the local gym membership. So these outcomes were then funneled into that big model that you saw before. And this took into account that do not overclaim principles and then removed some value. So the SROI, again, in the do not overclaim principle, then deducts values such as dead weight, attribution, and benefit periods. So for example, the SROI deducts that dead weight, which is otherwise known as the value that would have happened anyway. So for example, people told us that they experienced improved physical benefits from visiting our park. However, we also know that they would get some of that benefit through other means, such as walking to the park, which is outside of our scope. The SROI also deducts attribution, which is value that is generated by other actors. So for example, even though school children visiting the park might have told us that they learn more about their environment while they're visiting the park or sports ground, we also know that they'll learn about this through others as well.
All right, so now that you've heard about the model, we'd like to take you through some of the findings and insights from our visits to the parks and sports grounds. So Jubilee Park is a local park located in medium to high density community close to the CBD, and it's surrounded by apartments, and we know that over 700 children live in the buildings surrounding the park. Over 90% of people surveyed here agreed that coming to the park allows them to enjoy the natural environment and it improves their state of mind. So this is Jubilee Park, and it was particularly valued for that CBD location and ability to provide a backyard for residents living close by. It's seen as a place to relax and connect with others, and it's dominated by young families who utilise the space for play. It's also seen as an escape from the built environment, with many residents and workers utilising the space in their free time. West Epping Park, it's a recently upgraded district park located in the growing community of Epping. It's well regarded by the community for its range of facilities and diversity of uses. And over 96% of people surveyed here agreed that coming to the park is good for the physical development of their children. This park's located next to a local primary school and the Epping YMCA. It's heavily utilised by the community, as you can see on this photo here. So when surveying community members at West Epping Park, we met Emily. Emily moved to Australia with her young family 5 years ago. In Beijing, she used to travel 30 minutes by subway to Beijing Olympic Centre to access green open space. But since moving, Emily visits West Epping Park every day after dropping her young daughter off at primary school, which is just at the top of the hill behind the park there. This recent park upgrade encouraged Emily to take up regular exercise, something she's never done before. Spending time in the fresh air and sunshine and being able to run around the park has improved Emily's physical health and state of mind. Emily also encourages her young friends to meet at the park, and together they enjoy the safe and comfortable feel it offers. And after school, the children use the park for active play. Max Ruddock Reserve, it's a local sports grounds surrounded by low-density residential dwellings in Winston Hills. And 93% of people surveyed here agreed that coming to the sports ground is good for their family relationships and their friendships. And it's seen by the community as a local meeting point, and many people we spoke to have been coming to this sports ground for many years and often across generations. When we were surveying community members at Max Ruddock, we met Chris. Chris moved from Calcutta, India to Australia in 1988 with his, where he married and then had two children. When he arrived in Australia, Chris didn't know a lot about people and found that sports grounds are a great place to meet people. He said he's made lots of lifelong friends by standing on the sidelines at sports grounds watching his boys play soccer. And he values the green open space in helping him to understand the local environment and learn more about the people who use them. Being part of a sports club means that Chris has felt he's part of a good community that supports his family and that he's among like-minded people. And then there's Robin Thomas Reserve in Parramatta. It's a local sports ground located in a medium to high density residential community, also close to the CBD. 94% of people surveyed they agreed that coming to this sports ground is good for their friendships, and that parks and sports grounds make City of Parramatta a great place to live, work and visit. So this is the sports ground, and it's heavily utilised and particularly valued with the local schools. So Arthur Phillip High School, it's located near the reserve, and it currently has around 1,200 students, and it's set to become the first vertical school in Australia. The school currently has a chronic shortage of green space, and they rely heavily on this sports ground to get students out of the classroom and be active. Staff believe that coming to this sports ground has improved the behavioural outcomes and enhances academic achievements of the students. And for some of the lower socioeconomic children, participation in sport during school is the only opportunity they get to be physically active.
Thanks, Mel. Okay, so now for the big reveal. The evaluation found that for every dollar invested in council's parks and sports grounds, around $10 of social and economic value is created for and experienced by a range of stakeholders every year. So this evaluation looks a little different for parks and sports grounds when you break it down. For sports grounds overall, for every dollar you put in, $38 worth of social and economic value was created. And for parks, for every dollar you put in, $7 worth of value was created. So while that sounds like a big difference in numbers, what I'll stress is that the value that is created through both parks and sports grounds is very significant, and the number change is predominantly due to the utilisation. So because we were surveying at sports grounds, we were able to survey a great number of people utilising this space for purposes such as competition sport, and therefore, because of the numbers of people there at any given time, it has pushed up that number. But most importantly, how we'll be using this information and how can you use this information? So Council and Health have already been using this information to help us with a range of things, including how we make decisions about investment in our green places. It's helping us to advocate for our green places and the quality of facilities, particularly in our high growth areas. We'll be using it to add a health perspective with regard to improving physical and mental health outcomes through access to these places, and we'll be using it as an evidence base for providing comments and a baseline for future evaluation measures and comparative data into the future. And that's it from us. Thank you very much.